With the world currently a state of chaos due to the rapid spread of a virus, there's no better time to escape into the world of video games. That's why it's so great that the Resident Evil 3 remake was recently released, a game where you escape from a city which is in a state of chaos due to the rapid spread of a virus. Well, strange timing aside, I couldn't wait for the release of this game. It was one of my most anticipated games of this year, and with how incredible the Resident Evil 2 remake was, I had high hopes for this game. But did it meet my expectations? Don't worry about spoilers though, as I won't be diving too deep in. And now, let's find out. Before I talk about the game itself, I want to briefly talk about its development. Now, this isn't going to be a large, in-depth look at the development cycle, as I really don't know nearly enough about that, but there are a few things that I want to highlight about how Resident Evil 3 was made, namely the fact that it was developed alongside RE2R. This explains why it released only a year afterwards, which is very fast for video games, but also it helps the games both feel connected, which makes sense considering they take place around the same time in Raccoon City, the same city. In RE3R, you even revisit some locations from RE2R, which at this point feel like old friends after all the hours you spent in them, playing them there. The story of Resident Evil 3 is a prequel to Resident Evil 2, but it also catches back up to Resident Evil 2 later on in the story, and it follows up on Jill Valentine 2 months after the events of the first Resident Evil. She's living in Raccoon City investigating the Umbrella Corporation, but she's preparing to leave the city in 3 days. However, the citizens are being infected by the T-virus, and zombies are roaming the streets. Jill's other STARS teammate, Brad Vickers, tries to warn her to leave, but she's ambushed in her apartment by Nemesis, a new bioweapon from the Umbrella Corporation. He completely destroys the building around her, but she manages to escape as the building crumbles. Brad meets her out on the street and they try to escape, but Brad gets bit while holding the doors back against the zombies. Jill has another encounter with Nemesis, but one of the UBCS members sent by Umbrella, Carlos, manages to fight him off and get Jill to safety in the subway. The rest of the UBCS are down there, and they explain to Jill that they're loading survivors on the train to get them out of the city and to escape. Jill starts working with them to restore the power to the subway to get it to move, and that's where I'm going to leave this story summary. RE3 has some really good pacing and a pretty great story that I don't want to spoil for people. And it's very similar to the original story, but there are a few notable changes later on that really you do not want those spoiled for you. They're pretty good. So just know that there's more to the story than I let on, and things go from 0 to 100 later on in the story, if they weren't already at 100. Easily one of the best parts of this game is the characters, as they are all incredible, namely Jill and Carlos, the two protagonists. Jill Valentine feels like a complete natural progression from Resident Evil 1, as she's tough and able to handle the situation, but can still get overwhelmed and still feels human. I also love how she's kind of just done with everything, especially Nemesis throughout the game.
Creepy ass stalker. You want stars? I'll give you stars.
And she keeps that entire energy the whole way through. Also, I can't not mention how pretty Jill is in this game. I mean, I love her so much. But Carlos as well. Carlos is also great in this game, as he can bring some levity to the game, but he does have some more great emotional scenes, especially later on in the game. Jill and Carlos have a great relationship, because they start off on their own foot, kind of, jabbing at each other, namely because Carlos is working for Umbrella, but later on they really start acting like a great team. This doesn't mean the side characters are bad, though, far from it. Granted, I can't talk about all the side characters because of some story events, but Mikhail is great and feels like a nice grandpa, and Nikolai is just one of those characters you love to hate. Like, while I played the game, I was like, God, I want to kill you, but that's the angle they were going for, so, character you love to hate. Yet RE3 also makes you feel for characters you've never even met alive. There are a fair amount of journals throughout the city where you can read about people's last moments, some tragic, some trying to be heroes, some trying to be cowards, but they all make you feel bad about shooting the zombies that stand in your way, or sometimes you don't even see a zombie, just the corpse of what once was. There's one major character I haven't talked about yet, though, and that's Nemesis. Now, I'm conflicted about Nemesis, because he's scary and intimidating and also cool, but I kind of feel like he's underused. I think it's good they dropped the Nemesis subtitle for this remake, as it really wouldn't fit this game. Nemesis manages to ramp up in difficulty for each concurrent boss fight with him, and I gotta say, his final boss fight is incredible. Actually, last two. Really, just every boss fight with Nemesis is great, and that's one thing. They're really good boss fights. However, he could have still been better utilized. There are large periods of time when Nemesis is just absent, and his presence could have heavily amped up the stress of the situation, when he shows up, you can either run away or fight him. And if you manage to knock him down, then you can get some umbrella cases that can carry a variety of things. And trust me, you're going to want to get all those cases. Don't do what I did on my first playthrough and miss a few of them. But if you've got a grenade, it instantly knocks him down. That's because grenades are kind of overpowered in RE3. If you're having to fight him, though, with regular guns, that's when things start to get interesting, because he's not as easy to take down. You're going to have to use your environment on that one, because there are obstacles in the environment, such as gas tanks and generators that can stun or explode on him. So when you're not fighting with a grenade, that's when things really get interesting, and the early Nemesis fights are really fun when he's chasing you around. Overall, when Nemesis shows up and chases you around, it's really cool and really fun, because, that's a whole nother layer you have to add onto running through the streets of Raccoon City. But there's a lot of times when he just, there's large swaths of time when he's not there, and he really could have been used better in those periods. Resident Evil 3 is built on the RE engine that was used for Resident Evil 2, the remake of that, and the gameplay based off of it is incredible. The third-person perspective is great. I'm much more of a fan of that than the first-person, although there are a few segments when you get into first-person in here, not for gameplay, more like cutscenes, but it's still a nice nod to Resident Evil 7, that type of thing. But back to this. Third-person is great because the shooting is just so good with all the different weapons. There are a fair amount. It's a Resident Evil game, so obviously there's a bunch of different weapons. But there are a few changes from RE2R that really make me prefer this game, and it's the superior gameplay experience, to me at least. The first is the removal of sub-weapons. So like flash grenades, grenades, and the knife. Those are no longer something that you can attack a zombie with if you're grabbed, because those are just regular weapons now. So the knife doesn't break. Thank God. That was one of the worst parts about Resident Evil 2. So now if you're grabbed by a zombie, you can tap or change it to hold. I would change it to hold because tapping is annoying. So you can take less damage from a zombie, but there's no escaping it anymore. However, since, the knife and grenade are actual weapons, they're a bit more useful. They don't break it, or I guess the knife doesn't break as much. I think that's better, but that's because the evade is the newest big change, and oh my god, I love it so much. You can use it to dodge past enemies, but if you time it just right, you enter a slight state of slow motion, where you can take a few shots on the enemy or use that experience to get farther away. It's such a great and natural addition to Jill's arsenal, and it makes it way easier to get past the zombies. And this perfect dodge, it has a nice risk versus reward aspect to the mechanic, because if you stay far away, you can try to shoot and pick away, or you can just run around. But if you want to get the zombies out of the way, or if you're getting swarmed, you can do the perfect dodge, and that'll give you a chance to get a few extra shots in. And it's not super overpowered. It's, one or two shots can get fired off, nothing crazy. But using every move at your disposal against Nemesis, the Hunters, and the different bosses, it's incredible, and it's so much fun. RE3 is one of the games where I've literally been wanting to play it more, not just for the story or the experience, but because it's just fun to play. Like, I've literally, when I haven't been playing it, maybe writing, doing other things, I've just, been remembering stuff that I've done with the gameplay, because it's just such good controls, such a fun time playing it. It's hard to vocalize without, actually playing it yourself, but I feel like, if you've played it, you understand what I mean. It's just, there's a lot you can do, a lot of moves you can chain together, and it's really fun once you have gotten, maybe on a different playthrough when you've, because there are multiple playthroughs. You're obviously going to do multiple playthroughs. That's what you do for most Resident Evil games. But it's great once you know the weapons, you know the roads, and just, doing things smoothly, taking down zombies, sometimes just knocking them down, strategizing. It's just so fun to play. And that's one of the biggest, pulls to get me back into the game, keep me doing multiple playthroughs, trying to get me to do all those achievements. It's just fun, man. Seeing as Resident Evil 3 is a horror game, though, the presentation is super important. And by God, does this game knock it out of the park. Graphically, the RE engine is one of the best things to come to humanity, because Raccoon City and its inhabitants look crazy good. Same as Resident Evil 2, I feel like they touched up a little bit more probably for this, because it looks real good. It's just baffling how the developers got it to look so realistic and lifelike. All the zombies and people look incredibly realistic. I mean, especially how gorgeous Jill is. But this engine also works wonders for Nemesis and the other, more minor enemies. Nemesis looks insane, and as his state worsens, the more you face him, and the gross flesh on his face and the weird like missing patches of skin. It's crazy. And for some of the more minor enemies, I don't want to go into the later ones, but like Drain Deimos, that's an early level one. Just that whole environment and the Drain Deimos themselves, so cool and so much better. Like one of the best things about this and RE2R is seeing how they graphically update everything from the PlayStation game, the original PlayStation games, and like it's so cool seeing these, looking at those and seeing the blocks, the blocky enemies, and then coming to this and it looks, crazy but like realistic, like you could, imagine seeing this for real, because it's not, totally weird and out there in its design anymore. It's so cool and such a difficult balancing act, I assume, that the developers had to do to mix that original design and still keep it to look unique and creative while also trying to make it look like it would fit in the world. So yeah, Resident Evil, its graphics are incredible, and while it's a bit more action-packed than RE2R, I would say, it's got a killer atmosphere that can keep you tense and on the edge throughout a lot of the journey. One of the biggest parts of Resident Evil 3, though, is Raccoon City itself, which is much more expansive than the last time you visited, and has a lot of crazy environments. While the city is large, you end up getting really familiar with the areas you frequently travel along. There are a fair amount of buildings you can travel into, and by the end of the game, you've gone way across the city, both topside and underground. Even within certain sections, there will be small stuff that greatly stands out, like passing the police office and hearing Resident Evil 2 music. Just those small details that make things great. Yet my favorite area is easily the hospital. While I won't talk about it too much since that's in the late game, it has some super terrifying but also super fun moments. I think it's easily my favorite area because you have to go about it differently in different difficulties. Because obviously when you play the easier difficulties, you're going to be a lot more packed by then because it's the end game, and so you're a lot more able to adequately deal with it. However, once you play on harder difficulties, it becomes less about, forcing your way through there and having to strategize, having to think more carefully. And that's one of the things I love about Resident Evil is that balance. I think that's one thing Resident Evil 3 and Resident Evil 2, but more Resident Evil 3 because it's a bit more action-backed, does really well, is that if you play on easier difficulties, it's still scary, but it's almost more like a scary action game, whereas the farther you go into the harder difficulties, that's when things really get scary, because it's not just, oh god, there are zombies running around. It's, oh god, one of these zombies can, kill me flat out because I am, almost dead, or can drop me to almost dead health. And so then you have to plan around that more. And that's one of the things that I love about Resident Evil, and that is one aspect this title really nails. So, yeah, as much as I love to talk about the hospital in depth, maybe I'll do that later point, but it's spoilers right now. I don't want to get into that, and I want you to enjoy it for yourself. Resident Evil 3 really does a great job in making Raccoon City feel alive and feel like it was lived in also, with different notes and newspapers and journals from all around the town. It really, it helps feel like there was a population. There were people who lived here before, and then, before the zombie apocalypse, the T-virus hit. So you feel bad for everything that happens to it throughout the game and happens to its inhabitants throughout the game. Now, while RE2R is incredible, and it may be better than this game, one department it was severely lacking in was the music. However, I'm glad to say that RE3R not only rectifies that problem, but it comes with some incredible tracks of its own. Some are updated and some are new, I believe. The Save Room song, Free From Fear, is great with its chilling yet soothing nature, and sometimes it just comes in the most needed scenarios. You're being chased by Nemesis, you got a green herb in the item box, but you're on danger, and just like when you finally get to the save room and just you hear that calming theme playing after the intense music, it's just, it's a great experience. But every boss fight is insane in this game, soundtrack-wise. Like, the final boss fight is, it's such a good score, and especially when you're playing it, don't listen to it on its own until you've played the game, and then listen to it after to really appreciate it. But when you're playing, it's so intense, and like, it builds it up throughout. And by this game having a consistent soundtrack all throughout your play really helps bring more impact to the stronger events, because these are such strong songs now. But it also makes the game feel a bit more cinematic and, like a story, which, say what you will, there are people complaining that it's short, which it is somewhat shorter than regular, than other Resident Evil games, not by too much, I'd say. But say what you will about that, I think it has one of the most put together and, clean-cut stories of all the series. So RE2R, like, it's got more story, but this one, it feels like more of an experience. Like, you know what's going to happen from beginning to end. On a subsequent playthrough, there's not as much changing, because there used to be like a choice system in the original game. They removed that, and so I think it does help do a better narrative. So take it as you want. Like, you know, some people want that more expansive, less, you know, conclusive narrative, but also, you know, as seen here, it can be very strong to have, you know, one solid narrative throughout, and I really do think that helps RE3 in this case. So yeah, the music, it's great. I'm glad there's a lot of music this time, because that was one thing, you know, and like there's a little bit where it's like, oh, the silence makes you more fearful of the zombies, but I think having the music to kind of play on your fears and, you know, slowly rise in the back, I think that really does more than just the silence could. But there's still silence in this game, which is, you know, that's something that helps, because everybody's seen a horror movie where it goes silent right before the jump scare. The silence isn't gone in this game, it's just not as prevalent, which, you know, makes the instances where it's used more scary and more impactful. So the music, incredible. It's a great soundtrack. Now, I've talked about how the game has some strong action in this earlier, but what about its horror? Well, I think it's a bit of a step down from RE2R, as I said, but it's still pretty good in its own right. A lot of the best horror comes from the unfamiliarity of the scenarios you get put into. So definitely the horror is a lot stronger the earlier playthroughs. However, as I mentioned earlier, the horror that comes, you know, in the dangerous of the later playthroughs also has something. But there's a good amount of the horror of unfamiliarity with Nemesis and the Drain Deimos, especially the hospital and very final portion, which I'm not even going to tell you what it is. But when you're not in those sections, it isn't always scary, especially, you know, running along the streets of Raccoon City. Like, Nemesis doesn't always drop in, whereas, you know, in the RPD, things would change along the streets, and they don't do that as much. They do it slightly with Nemesis interacting with the zombies, but, like, they don't change that much on the streets. It's generally what you see is what you get, whereas in RE2R, you know, enemies that weren't there before, like lickers and stuff, would later appear in areas you thought you had cleared out, you thought you were done with. And, you know, Mr. X was a very heavy threat in that game. He kept following you around in certain areas. So it's, you know, I think that had better consistent horror throughout the places, but this has better, like, individual spots of horror. And really the last portion of the game sans one large chunk that feels very later REs, like RE4 to RE6, you know, action-y. It's got some good horror there. But yeah, as I was saying, the difficulty range is really what puts up a lot of horror, because the threat of anything being able to take you down is good. But there's also still a healthy amount of subtle scares and jump scares that can tie you over the more plain areas. And sometimes it's not even, you know, it is a jump scare, but sometimes it's not even, you know, something that was being set up. It's just a zombie that you didn't see that gets you, and you just, you know, you jump. It happened to me a fair amount of times while I was playing. So the horror, it's not, you know, it's not Resident Evil's strongest horror game, but I think it balances it well between the horror and the action. So, is the Resident Evil 3 Remake worth getting? I would undoubtedly say yes. While it has a somewhat short runtime compared to other ones, the game is incredibly well made and super fun to play. Add on to that the multiple extra levels of difficulty, tons of challenges, and the incredible story that the game brings. It's a must-have for any Resident Evil fan, veteran or newcomer alike. But even if you're not a series fan, there's still tons of here that makes this game one you should pick up. First of all, what else are you going to do in quarantine? Make bread? We don't need that. Gameplay-wise, though, this is one of the best games in the series, as the controls are tight and fun to use on their own. It's not too hard to jump into without prior knowledge, both gameplay and story. Personally, I think if you want to play this one, I think you might want to pick up this and Resident Evil 2, because A, they work in tandem, B, Resident Evil 2 may be the better complete package. It's got more content, at least. I don't know, I'm flip-flopping. I think I might like Resident Evil 2 Remake more than this one, slightly. But again, this one is more fun to play for me. But yeah, also Resident Evil 2 is like $20, so I think if you got the combo of these two, that's a lot of fun Resident Evil to play right there. But honestly though, everybody should just play this game for Jill. She is completely perfect and beautiful and worth the price of admission alone. Thank you for watching my review on Resident Evil 3. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if you're going to get it, or if you have gotten it, what do you think of it? I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. If you haven't seen, I did a 40-minute video on every donut in Resident Evil 3, There's a place called Moon's Donuts that you can find. They have a bunch of donuts, and I categorized and said how good I thought they would taste for each donut in the store. So go watch that video. It's 40 minutes, but it's great. It's a good 40 minutes. But at least skip to the end because I go over the menu, and it's in the hundreds of dollars for donuts. So skip to the end to see how much a donut in Raccoon City would cost you. But yeah, if you've got any more ideas for Resident Evil videos, let me hear them. I'd love to entertain them if I can. I've got one more Resident Evil video planned, and it's on the opening and just how incredible that opening is for this game. So yeah, until then, I'm Logan, and goodbye.